And what about a model sporting clothes from a designer's spring line? Hitting the runway, she's the combined artistry of fashion and identity. But what of the person who graces the catwalk in designer clothes? Is she what she's wearing? Is her worth woven into the label? Identity is one of the many ways we describe and assess our own and other people's value. Identity can consist of the different roles that we hold in life. Everything from our job titles to our home life play into the equation of how we identify ourselves. Our family history, our culture, and the people we associate with or cheer for all add to this algorithm. Most of us get a feeling of security from knowing who we are. We express our identity in various ways, everything from religion to the arts to politics, provide ways to show who we are. And one of the most common ways of representing our identity is through fashion. Fashion and identity go hand in hand, and they've done so throughout history. Think military uniform, chemist lab coat, doctor's scrubs, dancer's leotard, or clergy robe. You may have heard the saying, clothes make the man, or the woman. What if instead of making the man, clothes turned out to be the man's undoing? Joseph was the 11th son of Hebrew patriarch Jacob and the firstborn son of Rachel, his father's favorite wife. Joseph reminded his dad of his beloved wife, so he was Jacob's favorite. Jacob loved and favored Joseph, and that made all the rest feel second best, which is just a perfect recipe if you want to cook up some sibling rivalry and fratricide. During the biblical era in ancient Israel, wealthy people wore clothes made of fine linen, wool, and silk, while the working class wore a rougher weave of wool fiber. So Joseph's brothers were furious when Jacob gave Joseph an expensive long-sleeve coat. It's translated in the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible as a coat of many colors. Long sleeves were only worn by rich people who didn't do manual labor, as the sleeves would get in their way. So now Joseph was being singled out for a life of luxury, and his brothers understandably resented it. Jacob didn't know it then, but gifting Joseph with that fancy coat was a fatal fashion faux pas. Father Jacob sent Joseph to check on his brothers who were tending the flocks on the family's land in Shechem, which was 50 miles north of where they lived in Hebron. With some of his mom's homemade oatmeal cookies tucked into his backpack, Joseph set out for Shechem, dressed in his fabulous coat. When Joseph reached Shechem, he didn't know where to find his brothers. He was lost, wandering around in the fields, when an unnamed man came up to him and asked, "What are you looking for?" Joseph said he was looking for his brothers, and the man pointed him to Dothan, 50 miles further north. Listen now to Genesis 37. So Joseph took off, tracked his brothers down, and found them in Dothan. They spotted him off from the distance. By the time he got to them, they'd cooked up the plot to kill him. The brothers were saying, "Here comes that dreamer. Let's kill him and throw him into one of these old cisterns. We can say a vicious animal ate him up. We'll see what his dreams amount to." Reuben, the oldest, heard the brothers talking and intervened to save him. "We're not going to kill him. No murder. Go ahead and throw him in the cistern out here in the wild, but don't hurt him." Reuben planned to go back later and take Joseph out, and take him back to his father. When Joseph reached his brothers, they ripped off the fancy coat he was wearing, grabbed him, and threw him in the cistern. The cistern was dry, there was no water in it. Then they sat down to eat their supper. Looking up, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites on their way from Gilead, their camels loaded with spices and ointments and perfume to sell in Egypt. Judah said, "Brothers, what are we going to get out of killing our brother and concealing the evidence? Let's sell him to the Ishmaelites. Let's not kill him. After all, he is our own flesh and blood." His brothers agreed. By the time the Midianite traders were passing by, his brothers pulled Joseph out of the cistern and sold him for 20 pieces of silver to the Ishmaelites, who took Joseph with them down to Egypt. This is God's word for us, God's people. Thanks be to God. Andrew Lloyd Webber and Tim Rice told Joseph's story in the musical Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, a play that ran in London's West End and then also on Broadway. From 1992 to 1997, and then in the 1999 movie adaptation, Donny Osmond starred as Joseph. Be still, my beating heart. In the play, clever lyrics sung by the narrator and Father Jacob, the brothers, and Joseph tell the story. Here are some lines from the song Joseph's Coat. Being told we're also Rands does not make us Joseph fans. Joseph's charm and winning smiles fail to slay us in the aisles. And their father couldn't see the danger. He could not imagine any danger. He just saw in Joseph all his dreams come true. Jacob wanted to show the world he loved his son, to make it clear that Joseph was the special one. So Jacob bought his son a coat, a multicolored coat to wear. Joseph said, "When I got to try it on, I knew my sheepskin days were gone. Such a dazzling coat of many colors." How he loved his coat of many colors. In a class above the rest, it even went well with his vest. Such a stunning coat of many colors. How he loved his coat of many colors. It was red and yellow and green and brown and blue. Joseph's brothers weren't too pleased with what they saw. They said, "We never liked him all that much before, and now this coat has got our goat. We feel life is unfair." And when Joseph graced the scene, his brothers turned a shade of green. His astounding clothing took the biscuit. Quite the smoothest person in the district. It didn't help that Joseph said, "I look handsome. I look smart. I am a walking work of art." Such a dazzling coat of many colors. How I love my coat of many colors. It was red and yellow and green and brown, etc. Lots more colors. Joseph made it to Dothan, and he caught up to his brothers, who, to put it mildly, weren't thrilled to see him. They were so jealous of their father's favorite son that they wanted to kill him. So Joseph's brothers did away with him by throwing him into that pit. Reading Joseph's story in Genesis, we can kind of see their point. Not only did kid brother Joseph have dreams in which he was Mr. Big Stuff, and they were all groveling at his feet, but he recounted those dreams in great detail at the breakfast table the following morning. Being his father's pet, they seethed at the sight of the many-colored coat that he flaunted while they were running around in t-shirts and dirty jeans. They wanted him dead, but to avoid blood guilt, they lowered him into a pit without water to die of exposure in the desert. Big brother Reuben made a plan to rescue Joseph later. As the oldest, He was responsible for looking after his brother. Adding insult to misery, the brothers sat beside the pit where they'd flung Joseph and had a picnic supper. While they were snacking on the leftover oatmeal cookies from Joseph's backpack, a caravan of nomadic Ishmaelites passed by. Never missing an opportunity to make a buck, they hauled Joseph out of that pit and sold him off cheap to the desert travelers who were doing caravan life before it was a thing. Who were the Ishmaelites? Ishmael was the first son of Abram and Sarai's Egyptian handmaid, Hagar. When they didn't have children a decade into their marriage, Abram's wife Sarai suggested that Abram have a child with Hagar. Hagar gave birth to Ishmael, Abram's firstborn son, when Abram was 86. In Islamic tradition, Ishmael's son gave rise to the 12 tribes of Ishmael, Arab tribes from which the early Muslims were descended. Then years later, when Abraham, name change, was 99, Sarah, name change, conceived and gave birth to Isaac. In Jewish tradition, the 12 tribes of Israel were descended from Abraham and Sarah's son Isaac, via Isaac's son Jacob. Jacob is Joseph's father, which brings us back to Joseph and his fancy coat that's not looking so fancy anymore. To cover up their crime of giving their punk kid brother Joseph the heave-ho, his brothers slaughtered a goat and dipped Joseph's fancy coat in it. They brought the bloody coat to their father Jacob and let Jacob draw his own conclusions. Jacob was filled with grief that his fair-haired favorite had a fatal tangle with a wild animal. And that grief over losing Joseph would haunt him for many years. Unknown to his brothers, Joseph eventually wound up in Egypt, where he was bought by an army man named Potiphar. Potiphar had a wife who sent thirst tweets to the handsome new servant. We'll hear more about that drama in Joseph's Story, Part 2. Years later, Joseph's brothers, who'd long since succeeded in putting him out of their minds, they turned up in Egypt too, looking for something to eat because they were having a famine back home. Joseph knew who they were right off, but because he was speaking Egyptian and dressed in a fancy uniform, not his fancy many-colored coat, his brothers didn't recognize him. Joseph could have had them executed for their treachery, but instead, he would offer them grace. But that's getting ahead of this week's story. So back now to sibling rivalry and family dysfunction, and to asking the question, what are we meant to learn from this sad saga in salvation history? That coat was a special gift from Jacob to Joseph, a gift that caused his brothers to despise him and want to kill him. Jacob perpetuated sibling rivalry with his extravagant haberdashery, and Joseph encouraged it with his pompous attitude. So Joseph's 11 brothers hated him and envied their brother's favored status. Maybe at the most basic lesson learned, if you're going to have a favorite child, it's best to keep that a secret. And also this, we're more than the clothes we wear and the names that are woven on the tag. Isaiah 49:16 tells us, "Behold, I have engraved you on the palms of my hands." Our names are engraved for eternity in the palms of the ones who created us. Our worth and our identity don't lie in a designer's name, be it Dior or Levi Strauss, but in our Creator. Fashion is a wonderful, fun, and creative way to express our identity. But retail therapy only gets us so far. The accessories that we need can't be bought in stores or online. Colossians 3 says, "Put on then, as God's chosen ones, holy and beloved, a compassionate heart, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience." Our fashion ensembles aren't complete without these beautiful essentials. God created us and our purpose in life. God is the one who holds our identity. Find comfort in this truth, whether you're looking super cute in your favorite outfit or when you're feeling down wearing sweatpants. Joseph's identity became wrapped up in a fancy coat until his jealous brothers destroyed it after they sold him into slavery. Later, this incident forced Joseph to walk into his God-given identity as a leader. No multicolored coat needed. Do clothes make the man? What if instead of making the man, clothes turned out to be a man's undoing? Or could God weave it all together and work it all together for good? Find out in the second episode of Joseph's story, coming soon to a pulpit near you. Amen.